I was ignored at the funeral, then a 4-star general did this, and everything changed. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone. I never thought I'd find myself standing there that morning, staring at an old man no one seemed to notice. It wasn't supposed to be like this. My name is Alec Rose, and this what? I'm about to tell you. It happened to me. Or maybe it's still happening. Because even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel it again. The way the air felt heavy, almost like something in the world had shifted without me knowing. It started that day at the funeral. Not mine, someone else's. A man I'd never met personally, but whose life somehow tied into the stories I carried with me. I had come because I felt I should. Funerals are supposed to be moments of respect, of remembering the lives that mattered, but this one wasn't like that, at least not for everyone. The chapel was cold and the air smelled faintly of old wood and lilies. I had taken a seat near the back, watching people drift in quietly. Some whispered to each other. Others didn't even glance toward the front. And then I noticed him, an old man, sitting all alone. Not a single person beside him. Not a single smile. No greeting. He just sat, shoulders stooped, eyes staring forward. It was strange. I thought maybe he was part of the funeral. Maybe a distant relative. But nobody seemed to see him. No one spoke to him. The crowd moved like water, flowing past him without a ripple. And in that moment, I noticed something that unsettled me. The old man wasn't just ignored, he was invisible. There was something in his face. Not anger, not sadness exactly, but something deeper, something that felt like years of being unseen. And I couldn't look away. My curiosity pulled me closer. I shifted in my seat, pretending to check my phone, but I kept glancing at him. I noticed his hands trembling slightly. His coat was worn and the seams fraying at the elbows. His boots looked heavy, like they'd carried him through a lifetime of hard journeys. I wondered what stories those boots could tell, stories of battles fought, of sacrifices made, of nights spent waiting for recognition that never came. The ceremony began. Soft music played. A voice spoke about the man we were there to honor. But in the quiet of the chapel, I kept thinking about the old man. I wondered why he was here, who he was, and why it felt like no one cared. I watched him as the minutes passed. He didn't shift. He didn't speak. He just sat there, still and quiet. And then I noticed the way people started to glance his way, quick looks, unsure. Some even looked away when he met their gaze. But no one approached him. Not one person. I could feel it then. This wasn't just about one man. It was about something bigger. Something I couldn't name yet. But it was pulling me in deeper, demanding that I pay attention. And then, something happened. A sound came from the entrance of the chapel. A slow, steady sound that made the air feel heavier. Boots. Not hurried steps, but deliberate ones. Like someone was walking with purpose. Everyone turned toward the sound. I followed their gaze. And that's when I saw him. A man in uniform. Not just any uniform, but one that carried power. A 4-star general. His medals glinted under the soft chapel lights. His boots echoed loudly against the floor. He didn't walk to the front. He walked directly to the old man. And the chapel went still. Something inside me tightened. My breath caught. I could see it in the faces around me. People leaning forward, craning their necks, unsure what they were about to witness. The general stopped right beside the old man. No words were spoken. Just a look. A look that seemed to carry years of respect, of sorrow, of truth. And then the general reached out. Just one hand, placed firmly on the old man's shoulder. And the room seemed to shift. Something deep, something unspoken passed between them. Gasps spread quietly, like a ripple through still water. Phones were raised. Whispers began to grow. I could feel the air change. Something invisible had shifted. But at that moment, I didn't know what it meant. I only knew this. Whatever happened next would change everything. And I was going to see it through. I still remember the sound of those boots, how they echoed slowly and firmly across the chapel floor. The way everyone's eyes were locked on the general and the old man. I could feel something stirring in the air, like the room itself was holding its breath. I wanted to move closer, to see the old man's face better, but my legs felt rooted to the pew. My heart was pounding. The general didn't speak. He just stayed there, hand on that old man's shoulder, looking straight into his eyes. And in that silence, the chapel became heavier. It wasn't just a room filled with people anymore. It was a moment suspended in time. Then the old man shifted. Slowly, almost painfully. He looked up, and I saw something in his face I couldn't forget. It wasn't just surprise, it was relief. Recognition. Something like peace after decades of being unseen. And my chest tightened. I felt like I was witnessing something sacred. No one moved for a long moment. Then the general stepped back. Without a word, he turned toward the front and stood there, tall and still. And that's when I noticed the change in the chapel. People were whispering now, quietly, nervously, like they didn't quite understand what they had just seen. I could hear it to a low murmur, like a tide rolling in. I shifted again, leaning forward, my mind racing. Why would a general, someone so important, come to a funeral just to stand silently beside an old man no one knew? What was that about? Then the ceremony continued, but everything felt different. The words spoken, the hymns, the prayers, they all seemed to fade into something deeper for me. My eyes kept drifting back to him. The old man, his name, I still didn't know. But I could feel the weight of his story pressing on me. After the service, people began to file out slowly. I stayed where I was, watching him. I saw the general step away and stand in quiet conversation with another officer. But my eyes never left the old man. Something made me stand too, almost without thinking. I moved through the crowd carefully, keeping my pace slow, as if I was afraid he might disappear. The chapel was buzzing now, low conversations, nervous glances, footsteps echoing against the floor. But around him, there was silence. When I reached him, he was still seated, his hands resting loosely in his lap. His eyes were fixed somewhere ahead, but not on anything in the room. I couldn't tell if he was remembering something or simply lost. I hesitated before speaking. "Sir," my voice felt small in that heavy air. He blinked slowly and looked at me, not with suspicion, but with the kind of tired wonder, like he wasn't sure anyone was supposed to notice him. I swallowed hard. I just wanted to say hello. I'm Alec. He gave a small nod. "Harold," he said quietly. His voice was low, almost fragile, but there was something steady in it, something that told me he had lived through storms I could never imagine. And then, without warning, his eyes filled with something I couldn't name. Not sadness, not joy, but a mixture of both. He said, "They've always ignored me, but today, someone saw me." That line hit me harder than anything else. I could feel my throat tighten. It wasn't just about him. It was about every person who had ever been unseen, unheard, overlooked. I wanted to ask him more, but before I could speak, the general walked past us. I could see him glance at Harold again. Not a glance of obligation, something deeper, almost reverent. I turned back to Harold. "Why do you think he did that?" I asked softly. He didn't answer right away. He just looked toward the chapel doors as if watching something only he could see. Then he said quietly, "Because he knows. Some of us carry wars we never finish, and some of us wait our whole lives for someone to notice." His words stayed with me long after we left the chapel. Outside, the air was sharp and cool. People hurried past, talking quietly about the funeral, about the general, about whatever had just happened inside. But I kept walking beside Harold, even though I didn't know where we were going. I wanted to know more. I wanted to understand why today felt like something more than a simple funeral. why it felt like the start of something I couldn't yet name. We walked in silence for a while. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice everything. The sound of leaves rustling, footsteps echoing against concrete, distant voices fading away. Harold didn't speak. He just kept walking, leaning slightly forward, his boots heavy with every step. I wanted to ask him about his story, about what he'd lived through. But something told me it wasn't the right moment, not yet. What I did know was this. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. That moment in the chapel had changed something. Not just for Harold, not just for me, but for everyone who had been there. And I knew deep in my bones that I was going to find out why. Because sometimes, the stories worth telling aren't the ones people remember. They're the ones people refuse to forget, and this was one of those stories. We walked for what felt like hours, though I don't think it was that long. The streets had emptied out. Streetlights flickered and the world felt quieter, like it had pulled itself away to watch something unfold without us noticing. Harold kept walking beside me, his pace slow but steady, as if he was carrying a weight I couldn't yet understand. I wanted to ask him where we were going, but something stopped me. There was something in his silence that made me feel I had to wait. Like a part of the story was unfolding in his mind before it could be told. Eventually, we arrived at a small park. It was one of those places you pass by without ever stopping to notice. The kind of park with cracked benches, a rusty swing set, and a few trees bending under the weight of their own history. Harold stopped near a bench and sat down, his hands resting heavily on his knees. I sat beside him, trying not to break the quiet. He looked at me after a while, his voice breaking the stillness. "You want to know what happened back there, don't you?" I nodded slowly. "Yes." He took a deep breath, as if he had been holding this moment for decades. "I've lived most of my life invisible. People walk past you, ignore you, make decisions about you without even knowing your name. You think you're safe because no one notices. But there's a price to that silence." I watched his face in the dim light. It wasn't bitterness that I saw, it was exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that comes from living with injustice for far too long. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I wasn't always like this. I used to believe things could change. I used to believe in fairness. But life? It teaches you lessons the hard way." My heart tightened. I wanted to hear everything, the whole truth. But I knew that truth would come in pieces, in moments, like this one. Then he looked up suddenly, eyes fixed on something far beyond me. That general, what he did today, it wasn't for him. It was for me. And it wasn't just a gesture. It was a reminder that someone still sees me. That someone still knows I matter. His words hit me like a sudden storm. I could feel my chest tighten again. It wasn't just the story he was telling. It was the weight of all the times he had been overlooked. All the years of being pushed aside. I wanted to ask him how it felt to carry that for so long. But before I could speak, Harold shifted. His eyes darkened. "It's not just about me anymore. It's about every person who's been ignored, dismissed, erased, and I can't stay silent any longer." I leaned closer, drawn into his words. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood, brushing the dust off his coat. His hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from something deeper. "You'll understand soon," he said quietly. Then he started walking again, and I followed without hesitation. We moved through winding streets, passing places I'd never noticed before. Old buildings with peeling paint, corners where the air felt thick with history. It was as if Harold was leading me towards something that had been waiting a long time to be revealed. Finally, we reached a small door tucked between two brick walls. It looked ordinary, almost forgotten. Harold paused in front of it, placing his hand on the worn handle. His eyes met mine, and I could see something unspoken there, a promise, a warning. "This is where it starts," he said softly. I looked at him, confused and unsure. "What starts?" He gave me a faint, sad smile. The part of my story that they never wanted anyone to know. Then he opened a door, and the air inside was different, heavy, charged, almost alive. I stepped in behind him, my heart pounding, my mind racing. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew I couldn't turn back. The room was small and dimly lit. Papers were scattered everywhere, old photographs pinned to the walls. It smelled of dust and something deeper, something like forgotten truths. Harold moved toward a table in the center, where a single file lay waiting. He picked it up slowly, as if it contained the weight of his entire life. This is why I am here. Why I stood there today. Because the truth has a way of finding you, whether you want it to or not. I swallowed hard, sensing the gravity of what was about to be revealed. Harold, what is this? He looked at me then, his eyes steady and filled with something I couldn't name. Proof. Proof of the things they've tried to bury. And I need you to see it. My breath caught in my throat. I knew, in that moment, that this wasn't just about a funeral. It wasn't just about an old man being noticed. This was something far bigger. Something that could change everything. Harold placed the file on the table gently, like it was something fragile, something that could shatter if handled too carelessly. I leaned closer, the dim light catching the edges of photographs and papers inside. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. This is what they've kept hidden, Harold said softly, almost to himself. His voice trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of truth. This is the part of my life, my story, that they thought no one should ever know. I reached out but stopped myself. The air in that small room felt heavier than before, charged with something I couldn't name. I knew whatever was in those papers would change everything. But I wasn't ready, not yet. Harold opened the file. Photographs fell out, black and white pictures of protests, old letters with faded ink. Reports stamped with words like confidential and /act. Each one felt like a piece of a puzzle I didn't yet understand. He picked up one photograph and held it close to the light. It was a picture of a young man in uniform, standing with his hand over his heart. There was something striking about the way he looked, proud, defiant, and yet somehow worn down. Harold's eyes lingered on it for a long moment. "That's me," he whispered, "years ago. Before the world decided I was invisible." I stared at him, trying to read the emotion in his face. There was pride, but also pain, a deep, unshakable pain that had taken years to carry. He shifted, flipping through more papers. I joined the service to make a difference. I believed in fairness. But it wasn't long before I realized it wasn't about service, it was about power. And the people who speak the truth, they get silenced. My breath caught. I'd never seen Harold like this before, so open. It felt like I was peeking into a part of him he'd hidden away for decades. Then what happened? I asked softly, afraid to hear the answer. Harold looked up, his eyes meeting mine. They tried to erase me. Every achievement, every story, every proof of what I'd done it was wiped away. And not just mine. Others like me faced the same. It was as if we never existed. I felt my stomach tighten. Why are you telling me this now? He closed the file with a slow, deliberate motion. Because today, when they saw me at that funeral, it wasn't just about my story anymore. It was about every story they've tried to bury. And I can't let that happen. Not anymore. There was a long pause. The kind where the air feels so heavy you can't breathe. I wanted to ask more questions, but I felt something shift in the room. Harold stood up, moving toward the door. "Come with me," he said. "I need to show you something else. Something that will make you understand everything." I hesitated, but curiosity outweighed fear. I followed him, my mind swirling with questions I wasn't ready to answer. We walked through winding hallways, each step echoing softly in the silence. The air grew colder, heavier, as if we were moving deeper into something secret. At last, we reached another door, smaller, older, its paint chipped and worn. Harold opened it slowly. Inside was a small chamber filled with more photographs, documents, and objects, each telling a piece of a story I still didn't fully understand. He stepped inside and gestured for me to follow. This room, it's been my life. Every injustice, every truth they've hidden, it's all here. I've kept it safe for years. But today something changed. I looked around, taking in the weight of decades. It wasn't just papers and photographs, it was history, real people, real lives. Lives erased. Harold turned to me, his voice low but fierce. They don't want the world to see this, but I'm done hiding. And I want you to help me make sure the world knows. I swallowed hard, the room spinning with the weight of what he was saying. This wasn't just his story anymore. It was a mission, a truth that demanded to be told. And I realized I was already part of it. Harold handed me a photograph from the file, a close-up of his younger self, standing proud despite everything. Remember this face, he said. Because the moment we expose this, nothing will ever be the same. I looked at the photograph, feeling a rush of emotions. Anger, sadness, fear, but also a strange sense of purpose. I didn't know exactly what we were walking into, but I knew there was no turning back now. We stepped out of the room together, the file tucked safely under Harold's arm. Outside, the night air felt heavier. The world seemed different somehow, as if it had shifted while we were inside. Harold stopped for a moment, looking up at the dark sky. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, "we have to be ready. This story isn't over," and I knew he was right. Because what we had just uncovered wasn't just about one man or one funeral. It was about the truth, something powerful enough to change everything. And the question was, would the world be ready to face it? The air felt electric as Harold and I stepped away from that secret room. My hands were still trembling, not just from fear, but because I understood now how heavy this truth was. It wasn't just his story anymore. It was mine too. And somehow, I knew it was bigger than both of us. We walked in silence through the empty hallways, the only sound our footsteps and the faint hum of something unseen like history whispering to us. Finally, Harold stopped near a large oak door. He looked at me, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before, a mixture of determination and dread. "This is it," he said softly. "Everything they tried to hide, it's all here. And once it comes out, there's no turning back." I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry, but I nodded. "Let's do it." He opened the door. Inside was an auditorium, empty, silent, but filled with the weight of what was about to happen. Harold stepped forward to a podium, the file in his hands. The light above flickered once, twice, then stayed steady. It felt like the world was holding its breath. He cleared his throat. "Today," he began, "I'm telling you a story. Not just mine, but a story that belongs to so many who have been silenced." His voice was steady, but I could hear the raw emotion under it. They wanted us to be invisible. They wanted our truth buried, but truth has a way of finding its way out. I watched him pull photographs, letters, and reports from the file, placing them one by one on the podium. Every image told a story, faces of forgotten people, moments of injustice, proofs of a system that had chosen to turn its back. Then Harold paused. "There was a day," he said, "when I was standing in a room much like this one, filled with silence. They told me my story didn't matter, that no one would believe me. But today, I stand here to say, it matters. And you matter too." I felt tears sting my eyes. There was something about his words so simple, so human, that pierced right through me. This wasn't just about facts or evidence, it was about dignity, about being seen. The crowd outside began to gather, their murmurs growing louder. Somewhere far away, I heard the faint sound of sirens. My heart beat faster. This was the turning point, whether the truth would be heard or silenced again. Harold took a deep breath. "This isn't just my fight anymore," he said. "It's ours. Every person who's ever been ignored, silenced, erased. Today, we stand together, not just for justice but for change. The room was silent for a heartbeat, and then the applause started soft at first, then growing until it filled the entire space. I glanced at Harold, seeing him for the first time without fear. His shoulders were steady, his voice unwavering. We stepped out together, and the night was alive now, filled with voices, footsteps, questions. People were talking, pointing to the photographs, reading the letters, connecting the dots of a story they'd never been told before. I felt something shift deep inside me. This wasn't just about Harold anymore. It was about every person who had ever been silenced, about every truth that had been buried, and about me standing here, telling this story, knowing that it might change someone's life. Harold turned to me. "Alik," he said softly, "the hardest part isn't finding the truth. It's deciding what you do with it." I nodded, my voice trembling. "Then we share it, no matter what." And so we did. The story spread faster than I could have imagined. People began to speak. Questions were asked. Videos were shared. And somewhere deep in my heart, I knew Harold was right. The moment you let truth be heard, nothing is ever the same. Weeks later, I stood again at a quiet corner of the city where it all began. The air was cooler now, but the weight of that night stayed with me. I thought about Harold, about the file, about every face in those photographs. And I asked myself how many more stories like this were still hidden. The answer wasn't easy. But one thing I knew for certain: every time a truth is told, every time a voice is heard, we inch closer to a world where no one is invisible. And the real question remains, will we stand silent again, or will we rise? Because silence is easier. The truth changes everything. And I know this isn't the end of our story. It's only the beginning.